An excavator hit something metallic in a remote swamp. A few seconds later, the construction stopped. People turned pale, the machinery stalled, and the air seemed to freeze. From the black slurry, a sealed steel coffin slowly rose that had lain underground since the times of the Soviet Union. On its lid were scratches from the inside. Someone had desperately tried to get out, and someone had done everything to make this person disappear forever. But the swamp does not know how to keep secrets forever. What they found inside was the reason why they killed, erased names, and rewrote fates. Are you ready to learn the truth for which lives were paid? A cold Siberian morning hung over the plain. Damp fog lay low over the ground, and the swamp breathed heavily, as if unwilling to be disturbed. Construction of a new federal highway was underway on the outskirts of a small industrial city where once during the Soviet Union there had been a closed zone. There was no beauty or romance here, only black water, viscous soil, and roots going deep like old memories. Locals always avoided this place and simply called it the swamp. Thomas Winters stood at the edge of the site holding a metal mug with already cold tea. He was 41 years old, short and stocky with broad shoulders and hands roughened by work. His face seemed carved from stone with sharp cheekbones, a heavy chin, and a short dark beard with the first gray threads. His eyes were gray and calm, more accustomed to observing than speaking. Thomas was one of those people who believe not in slogans or promises, but in hard work. He grew up in a family of workers and lost his father early, who died of a heart attack right on shift. Since then, Thomas had learned the main thing, not to wait for justice, but simply to do his job honestly and silently. He did not like the swamp, but he respected such places. Land that stays silent for a long time usually holds something heavy. The roar of engines cut through the morning silence. The excavator slowly moved forward. Its bucket plunged into the black slurry with a dull, unpleasant sound. Behind the controls sat Alex Crawford, a young operator, thin and nervous with a constantly twitching gaze. He had worked here only the second month and kept looking around as if expecting a trick from the earth itself. "It is sticking again," he shouted, trying to straighten the machine. Thomas frowned. The swamp seemed to resist, not letting the metal go deeper. The bucket went under the water and suddenly jerked sharply. A sound rang out that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Not a soft squelch of soil, but a dry, dull blow against metal. The excavator jerked so hard that Alex cursed and sharply pulled the levers. The machine howled, the hydraulics strained, but the bucket would not yield. "What is there?" the foreman shouted. People began to gather, dropping their tools. Thomas felt something tighten inside. It was not fear, but instinct, that very feeling that appears a second before trouble. Alex gave more gas. The bucket slowly and with effort began to rise from the black water. A dark, uneven shape appeared covered in silt and roots. At first, everyone decided it was an old tank or a piece of equipment from Soviet times. There was plenty of that here. But as the dirt drained away, the shape became clearer. Straight angles, even edges, a closed structure. "It is a coffin," someone said quietly. The word hung in the air like a verdict. From the swamp rose a steel coffin, not wooden, not decorated, crude industrial, welded from thick metal sheets. Its surface was covered with rust streaks that ran down like dried blood. It was too heavy for an ordinary burial and too securely sealed. Thomas stepped closer without taking his eyes off. His heart beat steadily, but an unpleasant pressure appeared in his chest. When the bucket turned, scratches became visible on the lid, not from the bucket or time, deep chaotic grooves. Someone had scratched the metal from the inside for a long time and desperately. Thomas's mouth went dry. He had seen death before, accidents, falls, frostbite, but this was different. This was a struggle sealed in metal. Several workers stepped back. Someone crossed himself. Alex turned so pale that the freckles on his face became almost transparent. "Call the police," the foreman said, no longer shouting. The police arrived too quickly. Not even 20 minutes had passed when the area was cordoned off. Black cars drove up. People in uniform acted clearly without unnecessary words. One officer, a tall, thin man with a cold gaze, examined the coffin as if he had been waiting for it here. Thomas noticed that. The coffin was carefully lowered onto a solid platform. Experts in gloves examined the welded seams, took photographs, and talked in low voices. The swamp around began to hum with insects again, as if it had exhaled. When the coffin was lifted by a crane for loading, Thomas stood a little to the side. His gaze was fixed on the bottom, and then he saw it. From under the edge, together with a clump of dirt, something fell and dropped into the silt with a quiet sound. Thomas did not know why he did it. He simply squatted as if adjusting his shoelace, and his fingers felt cold metal. It was a key, old and heavy Soviet style, with a square head worn on a thin chain. Such a key does not open an apartment door. Such a key opens a safe. Thomas clenched it in his palm. Something clicked inside as if he had crossed a line. He quickly hid the key in the pocket of his work jacket and straightened up. No one noticed. Everyone was looking at the coffin. When the cars left and the cordon remained, work on the site was stopped. People spoke in whispers and ran to look at the swamp. Thomas stood silently. His hands still felt the weight of the key, as if the metal had soaked into the skin. He did not yet know that from that moment he ceased to be just a worker, and that the swamp had given him not a fine, but a debt. News did not come immediately. It crept up slowly like cold from the cracks of an old house, and Thomas felt it even before he heard the words. The next day, after the find in the swamp, he did not go to the construction site. Work there was suspended anyway, and inside him grew a strange anxiety, not panic, but a heavy, lingering expectation. The key lay in the pocket of his jacket, and Thomas kept touching it with his fingers as if checking that it had not disappeared. The only person he decided to turn to was Peter Lawson, his old acquaintance who worked as an orderly in the city morgue. Peter was 10 years older than Thomas, tall and thin with a constantly tired face and sparse light hair that he never combed. In his youth, he had served his military term in the late 80s, and since then had believed in neither heroism nor beautiful words. Working with the dead had made him quiet and cautious. He knew how to listen and rarely asked unnecessary questions. They met in the evening after Peter's shift. The morgue always smelled the same: bleach, cold, and something metallic that made one want to speak in a whisper. "Did you see him?" Thomas asked without naming the name. Peter looked at him for a long time before nodding. "I saw him, and I will say right away, it is an unusual body." He led Thomas into a small staff room, closed the door, and only then continued. The man was about 50 years old, good build, not a homeless person. The suit, though rotted from the water, had been expensive. The shoes were leather, Italian. Such things are not worn by accident. Thomas sat down, his back tensed. "Violent death?" he asked quietly. Peter nodded. "Multiple rib fractures, old and new, traces of blows to the head. One fracture healed incorrectly, so he had been beaten before. Then he fell silent, choosing his words. Then they sealed him in this coffin, possibly while still alive. The words lay between them like a concrete slab. The name? Thomas finally squeezed out. Peter lowered his voice to almost inaudible. Robert Wolfe. The name sounded simple, too simple for what stood behind it. An engineer and financier at the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s. He worked with government projects. "His case?" Peter snorted. "His case does not exist." The archival card of Robert Wolfe was marked with a strange stamp. "Top secret. The person is not subject to registration. The case is closed. The object did not exist." "That does not happen," Thomas muttered. "It happens," Peter answered calmly, "especially when the country was collapsing and money needed to be withdrawn quickly and quietly." Peter leaned closer. "But that is not all." He told about the find in the pocket of Robert Wolfe's jacket, an old heavy device, a miniature KGB dictaphone on magnetic tape. Such devices were issued to a limited circle of people. The body was partially damaged by water, but technology worked a small miracle. The recording was restored, not entirely, but enough. Thomas felt cold rise from inside again. "What is there?" he asked. Peter swallowed. The man's voice was weakened with pauses, as if it was hard for him to breathe. He knew they would kill him. He spoke of a secret program of the late Soviet Union, redistribution of land, minerals, and finances through fictitious enterprises. Money was withdrawn in advance, even before the collapse of the Union. Thomas listened without interrupting. He called it insurance for the chosen ones. Those who stood in power then wanted to remain in power later at any cost. Peter paused and continued. Robert Wolfe realized he had become superfluous. He collected evidence, documents, recordings, and for that they began to eliminate him. Thomas closed his eyes for a second. "Did he speak about his wife?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes. Anna Wolf, a journalist, thin with dark hair, always with a straight back, stubborn as a nail, she dug too deep. After her husband's disappearance, she did not stop. Peter's voice became quieter. 6 months later, she disappeared too. Silence hung in the room. The last phrase of the recording, Peter looked Thomas straight in the eyes. "If they find me, look for the key." "Something inside," Thomas snapped. His hand involuntarily clenched in his pocket. They had already found it, he thought, but not everything. "Are you sure I should know this?" Thomas asked. Peter smiled bitterly. "It is too late to think about whether it is possible. If you were there, if you saw the coffin, you are already inside like me." He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Be careful, Thomas. Such people are not killed halfway." When Thomas went outside, the city seemed alien. The streetlights burned the same way, cars drove about their business, but beneath this familiar layer, he now saw something else. A web of old decisions made in the shadows and the blood with which they were paid. At home, he sat at the table for a long time, placing the key in front of him. Dull metal, worn edges, the legacy of a dead man. He understood the main thing. Robert Wolfe did not die because he knew too much. He died because he left a trace, and that trace now held Thomas. A dry and cold night fell. Railway tracks outside the city creaked under rare trains, as if remembering times when completely different trains ran here. Thomas Winters drove slowly. The headlights picked out abandoned warehouses and crooked concrete fences from the darkness. He knew this area vaguely. Many years ago, he had worked here on the dismantling of old hangars. Then it had seemed dead to him. Now he understood it had simply been waiting. The key lay in the pocket of his jacket, heavy and cold. Since Peter had spoken the name Robert Wolfe and told about the dictaphone, Thomas no longer doubted. This key was not a coincidence. It was a pointer. He parked by the embankment where the asphalt had long cracked and walked on foot along the tracks. Warehouses stretched in a chain, identical gray with peeling paint and rusted gates. Most doors had been broken into by marauders back in the 90s, but one building stood out. It stood a little aside closer to the old switch. The windows were intact and the door was closed. Thomas stopped.